Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The Dr. Elijah Carter, 28, quietly entered room 407 at Mount Grace Medical Center. It was nearly midnight, the time when the world seemed to fall silent, when the once bustling hallways transformed into an almost sacred hush. The private unit, where the most fragile patients were housed, seemed frozen in time, as if suspended between hope and despair. In this room, bathed in subdued light, rested Vivian Lancaster at 47. She was the heiress to a global hotel empire, a woman whose name resonated in business circles and grand boardrooms. But at that precise moment, far from the pomp and luxury, she was only a motionless figure, lying in a sophisticated bed. Her body, connected to a multitude of machines and sensors, bore witness to an artificially maintained life. Vivian had been in a deep coma for 6 months now, following a tragic accident. Her private helicopter had crashed in the dense Costa Rican jungle as she was returning from a crucial business trip. Since then, teams of experienced doctors had followed one another, using the most advanced technology, exploring every possible avenue to revive this extraordinary woman. Yet, despite their efforts, they had all ultimately given up. Her body continued to function, but her mind seemed to have wandered into another, inaccessible world. Elijah Carter was not like other doctors. Born and raised in the working-class neighborhoods of Detroit, Elijah grew up in a sometimes hostile environment, but where his mother, a devoted nurse and strong woman, instilled in him the values of resilience, compassion, and perseverance. His father, however, passed away at a young age, leaving a void that young Elijah transformed into a driving force for success. A brilliant student, he had won a prestigious scholarship to one of the country's top medical schools. He had faced every hour of study, every sleepless night, every difficult internship with unwavering determination. His passion for neurology was born from his fascination with the human brain, that complex, mysterious masterpiece where science itself sometimes seemed to reach its limits. For Elijah, healing was not limited to visible symptoms. He believed that behind every patient, however silent or motionless, there was a story, a soul, a hidden light to be rekindled. Unlike his colleagues, Elijah Carter he didn't just read the charts on the monitors or fill out digital files. Where others saw a hopeless case, a passive figure in a sterile bed, he saw a woman who still had something to say. Every night, when his duties were complete, he quietly returned to room 407, gently closing the door behind him as if entering a sanctuary. He would sit on the gray velvet armchair by the bed and address Vivian Lancaster like an old friend, even if she never answered. "Today I almost spilled my coffee on Dr. Patel. She probably would have called it karma, after stealing my break room slot," he said with a half-smile. These moments, which might have seemed trivial, had become a kind of sacred ritual for him. He told her about his mother's battle with arthritis, his younger brother's hesitation about returning to school, his dreams of building a mobile clinic for inner-city children. And sometimes, he read passages from Baldwin, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison. He chose powerful words, vivid words, to awaken the one who was sleeping. Other nights, he would slip her headphones. Soft jazz, of Billie Holiday, of Chet Baker, or sometimes of the John Coltrane. He watched her face then, hoping for the slightest quiver, a tiny reaction, a flutter of an eyelash, a twitch. But nothing came. Only the steady breathing of the machine, the slow, constant beeps of the heart monitor. Until that evening. That evening, he was particularly tired. One of those days when patients come one after another and bad news seems to rain down. But despite his weariness, he entered the room as usual. Carefully, he undid the small strip of gauze placed on Vivian's right temple, gently cleaned the area with a sterile solution, and then began replacing a clean compress. Touching her skin, he whispered, "You know, even if you don't answer, I feel like you're there. So I'll keep believing. Even if I'm the only one." And at that precise moment, he saw it. A movement. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. Vivian's eyelids had twitched. First once. Then a second time. He froze. His heart pounding. He blinked, thinking he'd been dreaming. He moved closer, scrutinizing the patient's face. Then, again, a beat. Light, fragile, but real. The kind of detail a distracted eye would have missed. But Elijah was attentive, almost intuitive. He got up quickly and ran to the central office. He called out to the Dr. Samuel Reeves, the head of the neurological department, a man known for his coldness and his lack of faith in anything outside the protocols. Dr. Reeves. Come quickly. I think, she reacted. Her eyelids moved. Reeves barely looked up from his screen. Reflex movement, Carter. Facial muscles retain random activity even in a prolonged coma. You should know that. No, it wasn't just a spasm, I'm sure of it. She reacted right after I spoke to her. Dr. Reeves sighed, annoyed. He reluctantly got up, followed Elijah down the hall, entered the room, checked the vitals, and briefly observed Vivian's face. Everything is stable. No changes. And nothing unusual about the curves. What you saw was probably your imagination. That kind of false hope doesn't help anyone. He turned on his heel. Don't get attached, Carter. She's not coming back. Elijah stood there in the room, frozen, hurt, but not broken. He looked at Vivian for a long time, his eyes misty, and breathed softly. It feels like it's just the two of us, Vivian, but that's okay with me. Because I'm not giving up. And in the silence barely disturbed by the breathing of the machines, he could almost have sworn he saw a corner of his lips quivered, like a smile lost between two worlds. For weeks Elijah Carter returned, night after night, faithful to this silent ritual. Every day, it changed the same strip of gauze placed on the forehead of Vivian Lancaster. This gesture, which others would have performed mechanically, he did with infinite tenderness. He spoke little, but his hands said everything: respect, patience, humanity. He wiped her carefully, as if he were addressing a sleeping queen, or a wounded child. He was not just caring for a body. He honored a presence, even silent. What he didn't know was that in the inner world where Vivian had fallen, this voice, his voice, was the only thread that still attached it to the surface. Where everything was shadow, without landmarks or direction, his consciousness drifted slowly, as if suspended in a sea of mist. But in the midst of this nothingness, there was one thing that returned, night after night, a deep, calm, warm voice, unlike any she had ever known. This voice told her simple stories, childhood memories, dreams of justice. It was not a cry, nor an injunction. It was a real, human presence. Vivian couldn't have said where she was, or for how long. Everything was a blur. But she smelled that voice. And that voice didn't push her to come back. She was waiting for him. She accompanied him. In the limbo of her mind, she clung to it like a light in an endless tunnel. She didn't know the man's name, but she knew he still believed in her. He didn't expect anything. He didn't pretend. And this sincerity even pierced the walls of his coma. During this time, in the real world, another voice stirred in the shadows. Claire Lancaster, Vivian's younger sister, busied herself quietly. Officially, she was there to watch over her beloved sister. She put on a brave face in front of the media, attended family gatherings, and sometimes sat by Vivian's bedside for a few minutes, putting on a closed and compassionate face. But behind this facade of loyalty, Claire patiently built a much more cynical project. She had hired a law firm specializing in complex estates. She had discreetly contacted several key Lancaster Group shareholders. She was preparing the documents, probing the legal loopholes, and honing the arguments to declare permanent disability of Vivian, which would give him the right to take over the presidency of the family group. Every additional day of coma worked in his favor. Every minute without reaction consolidated his position. She thought everything was under control. What she hadn't anticipated was the night doctor. A young man she hadn't even noticed. One more face among the white coats, one she would have ignored in an elevator or a hallway. A simple intern, she thought, without influence, without a voice. And yet, he was his, without power or status, who reopened a door that everyone believed was closed. Because what no machine, no treatment, no protocol had managed to trigger, it was a gentle gesture, repeated every night. A voice, offered without hope, but full of faith. And this thread, which Vivian followed slowly in the darkness, now began to gently pull her towards the light. That Thursday, everything changed. Room 407 was peaceful, as it was every night. Dusk tinged the walls with a golden light filtering through the blinds. Elijah, faithful to his routine, was leaning over Vivian's bedside. He wore his gloves, gently cleaned the pale skin of her forehead, and carefully removed the worn bandage, replacing it. But tonight, his voice trembled slightly. Something about him was more fragile than usual. Mom refused her meds again today. She says she's suffered enough. I know I shouldn't bring it up here, but sometimes I just need someone to listen. Even if that someone doesn't answer. He smiled sadly, stared at the clean compress he had just placed, then added. And yet, I still hope. It's silly, isn't it? But I think we can hear you in there, Miss Lancaster. I think you're still fighting. At that precise moment, something tiny happened. A slight shiver ran down Vivian's left arm. Elijah at first thought it was a draft, an illusion. But then he felt almost imperceptible change in the air, as if the room itself had held its breath. He looked up, reflexively. And that's when he saw her. Vivian's eyelids fluttered gently. Once, twice. Then, slowly, his eyes opened. Big. Empty at first, then, conscious. Elijah froze. He felt his heart hammer in his chest, a brutal drum against his ribs. He took a step back, his mouth hanging open. Miss Lancaster. Are you awake? The silence that followed was suspended in the eternity of an instant. Then, in a weak, trembling voice, hoarse like an ancient wind, Vivian murmured. Your voice. I know it. Elijah felt tears well up in his eyes. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't false hope, she had returned. Then, suddenly, the machines were activated. Heart rate monitors picked up a sudden change, neurological sensors lit up, triggering a soft but insistent alarm. Nurses rushed over point 2, then 3. The corridor stirred. She's conscious. She spoke, Elijah cried, almost panting. Medical professionals rushed to her. One nurse immediately recorded the data, another took her blood pressure, while yet another connected new sensors for a complete brain scan. But in the midst of this clinical turmoil, Vivian only looked at him. Elijah. His eyes, tired but alive, were fixed on hers. There was in that gaze assaillant gratitude, a deep gratitude, as if, in the darkness of her coma, she had learned to know this man who had watched over her without ever expecting a reward. In his head, Elijah still heard Dr. Reeves' words, she won't come back. But she was there, alive. Present. Awake. It was not just the awakening of a body, it was the return of a soul. And deep down, Elijah understood that from that day forward, nothing would ever be the same again. The day after he woke up, Le Mount Grace Medical Center became the center of attention for national and international media. Cameras were gathered in front of the entrance, journalists jostled each other, shouting the same questions over and over again. Do you confirm Vivian Lancaster's awakening? Is she conscious? Can she speak? Is it true that she was clinically doomed? The television channels headlined. Medical miracle in Boston, Vivian Lancaster wakes up after 6 months in a coma. The billionaire comes back to life. What really happened? Does hope have a name? Dr. Elijah Carter at the heart of the mystery. But behind the spotlights and flashes, Vivian, still weak but lucid, had asked for only one thing. No conference. No parade. No public statement. I want to see Dr. Elijah Carter. Alone. Now. The medical staff hesitated. It wasn't in the protocol. Other specialists still needed to evaluate her. But Vivian had always been a strong-willed woman. And even from her bed, that will sounded like an order. When Elijah entered the room, he was nervous. He was still wearing his white coat, but this time he was cheered like the man behind the miracle. Yet he wasn't proud of it. He simply felt relieved, and curious to understand what Vivian really wanted to tell him. She stared at him for a long time. His features were still drawn, his voice soft but firm. Then she weakly raised her hand, and handed it to him. He took it cautiously, almost intimidated. He had never held a patient's hand like this. She smiled. "You're the one who brought me back," she said calmly. "Not the machines. Not the treatments. You. Your humanity. Your voice. Your silences. Your stories. I remember everything." Elijah tried to answer, his throat tight. I just did what I would have wanted done for my mother, if she were in your place." Vivian squeezed his hand a little tighter, and looked him straight in the eyes. "The world doesn't need heroes. It needs human presence. You have been, in my silence. And now, I am going to entrust you with a mission." He frowned, uncomprehending. She continued. "I'm going to create a foundation. A real one. Not a philanthropic facade. A free health center, cutting edge, for children from poor neighborhoods. With modern equipment, competent staff, and a soul. And I want that YOU be its medical director. Not an advisor. Not a supporting actor. The pillar. The heart." Elijah stood there frozen, shocked. "Miss Lancaster. I'm just a resident doctor. I'm not ready for this." She smiled softly. "You are more than you know. You were born ready. And you saw what no one else saw in me, so now let me give you back what you gave me. A second chance." During this time, Claire Lancaster, in the hushed silence of his glass office at the top of the Lancaster Tower, learned with amazement a piece of news that would upset all his plans. Vivian had changed her will. Not only had she amended her estate, drastically reducing Claire's share, but she had also transferred a significant portion of her shares to the future Lancaster Carter Foundation. The remainder would be placed in a trust, under independent ethics oversight. Furious, Claire banged her fist on her desk. But that was only the beginning of his fall. In the weeks that followed, a financial investigation commissioned by an external firm revealed suspicious transactions carried out by Claire during her sister's coma. Discrete stock Celesto shell companies. Pressure on board members to have her appointed interim president. Creating an offshore account in Dubai. All this to take complete control of the Lancaster empire, in Vivian's absence. But Vivian was indeed returned. And now, she was no longer alone. She had Elijah, an ally without personal ambition, but with a vision greater than fortune itself, that of a fairer world. A few months later, the gray sky of Chicago suddenly seemed brighter above the neighborhood of Englewood, one of the most forgotten in the city. That day, hundreds of people had gathered in front of a new, modern, bright building with large bay windows and clean lines, with a facade where one could read in sober and elegant letters. Lancaster Carter Foundation, Community Care Center for Children. This place, built in record time thanks to the impetus of Vivian Lancaster, was much more than a clinic. It was a symbol. An act of reparation. A bridge stretched between two worlds that had long been opposed, luxury and need, power and vulnerability, indifference and compassion. At the head of the project, Dr. Elijah Carter, dressed in a simple suit, stood straight in front of the entrance, surrounded by a medical team he had himself selected, doctors, nurses, psychologists, but also educators, social workers, volunteers. All chosen not only for their expertise, but for their heart, their patience, their ability to see the child before the diagnosis, the history before the pathology. Standing beside him despite medical recommendations, was Vivian. She was there, present in its new skin, no longer that of the inaccessible heiress, but that of a woman transformed by the ordeal, now anchored in human reality. His gaze scanned the crowd, attentive, serious and luminous at the same time. She took the microphone. A silence fell. "I spent 6 months locked in my own body. I was there, but no one knew. No one, except one person. She paused, looking down at Elijah. He spoke to me when no one believed in them anymore. He read me books. He told me about his life. He gave me a human presence where there were only machines. He never saw me as a file, but as a soul. And that humanity brought me back to life. That kind of respect changes the world. Applause. Some had tears in their eyes. Elijah approached the microphone in turn, slightly nervous, but with a straight look. He spoke soberly. I'm just a doctor. The son of a tired nurse and an absent father. I grew up in neighborhoods where illness, pain, fear, went untreated. Where people waited, sometimes in silence, to finally be seen. He looked around, taking in the neighborhood children and families. Sometimes, a simple gesture can change everything. A steadying hand. A gentle voice. A look that says, I see you. I changed a bandage. And without knowing it, I awakened a life. It's not a miracle. It's just what happens when you choose humanity. A loud silence followed his words. Then a standing ovation. Vivian and Elijah remained connected, not by a debt, not by a social or media obligation, but by a silent and deep respect. They never fell in love, as their bond was beyond classical feelings. It was a friendship born in the dark, forged in the absence of words, sealed by life itself. They sometimes met in the evenings, in the Foundation's glass-enclosed office, tea in hand, watching the children play in the courtyard. They didn't always talk. They didn't need to. Vivian, who once lived in the heights of skyscrapers, now had down to earth. And Elijah, who was once just a night resident, had become the beating heart of a project that healed bodies as well as hearts. And for Elijah, everything had started with a simple gesture. A strip of gauze lovingly changed. A voice whispered in the silence. A man who had believed when no one else believed it. Because sometimes, to awaken the impossible, all it takes is one human being, who still dares hope.